The envelope was pale yellow, taped at an awkward angle to Diane's front door. She knew what it was before she even touched it. The fluorescent sticker screamed "Notice to Vacate," its bold black letters the same shade as the pit in her stomach. It had been 23 years since she moved into the old Craftsman on East Juniper Street. Back then, the trees had barely reached the second story. Now their branches bowed like watchful sentinels, creaking under the weight of time. She stood there in her bathrobe, the winter air sharp against her skin, and read the letter once, then twice, as if repetition might render it less absurd. The name on the letterhead wasn't even one she recognized. Helix Property Holdings. She closed the door quietly, more stunned than angry. The hallway inside smelled faintly of cinnamon, a pot of apples she'd forgotten on the stove the night before. On the wall, photos of her daughters stared back at her. Holidays. Graduations. Weddings. A life, framed and pinned in place. Diane sat down at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in her hand. "This has to be a mistake," she whispered, but deep down, she already knew it wasn't. 2 weeks later, Diane stood alone at the courthouse, tucked inside the heavy brick building that smelled of old paper and linoleum polish. The hearing was scheduled for 9:15 a.m., courtroom C, and she arrived 30 minutes early. Not because she was eager, but because she didn't know where else to be. She wore a navy suit, one she hadn't touched since her retirement party. The skirt was tighter than she remembered, but it still fit. In the elevator mirror, she adjusted her collar, smoothing the lines of age that refused to hide. Her gray hair was pinned into a soft twist, the way her late husband used to like it. Composed. Dignified. Inside the courtroom, fluorescent lights buzzed. A younger woman in a tailored blazer sat at the plaintiff's table, typing briskly into a laptop. Her badge read Alexandra Tyne, attorney for Helix Holdings. A man sat beside her, expressionless, in a black suit that fit too perfectly. Diane took the defendant's seat. The judge entered moments later, his robe flowing behind him. The Honorable Carl D. Whitman. 60-something. Tired. Crown of white hair. He adjusted his glasses and thumbed through a folder without looking up. "Let's move this along," he muttered. "We've got a packed docket today." Alexandra stood first, delivering a crisp, rehearsed explanation. "Your Honor, our client acquired the property at 1484 East Juniper Street through a legitimate portfolio purchase last year. The current occupant, Ms. Diane Walker, has failed to vacate within the legally mandated transition period." "Your Honor," Diane said, standing slowly, "I've lived in that house for over 2 decades. I paid rent on time every month. I even paid for repairs when the management company stopped returning calls. I never received any communication about a sale. This notice came out of nowhere." Judge Whitman didn't look up from his papers. "Ma'am, if your lease wasn't renewed by the new ownership, then legally, there was no lease termination," Diane cut in. "There was fraud. Paperwork I never signed. Clauses I never agreed to." Now he looked at her, for just a second. Then rolled his eyes and leaned back in his chair. "Another dramatic tenant," he said under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. The words hit harder than she expected. Diane inhaled slowly. "I'm not here for drama. I'm here for the truth." Alexandra cleared her throat. "Ms. Walker is not a legal tenant under the revised ownership. The documentation forged by someone in your own office," Diane said. The room quieted slightly. The judge looked unimpressed. "Ms. Walker, unless you have material evidence or a named allegation, we need to proceed." Diane opened her worn leather folder. Pages rustled, old rental receipts, emails, copies of repair bills. But that wasn't what mattered now. Not anymore. She looked up, her voice low and steady. "I do have a name. One I think the court will recognize." Whitman tapped his pen impatiently. "This isn't a theater, Ms. Walker." "No," she said calmly. "But you might remember this name anyway." She paused, the silence stretched just long enough for heads to lift. Then, she said it. "Richard Loudon." Everything stopped. The typing halted. Alexandra Tyne's hands stiffened over the keyboard. The man beside her shifted slightly, his jaw tightening. Judge Whitman sat straighter in his chair. His fingers curled against the edge of the bench, and for the first time all morning, he looked directly at Diane, not as a tenant, not as a nuisance, but as something else, something unexpected, something dangerous. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice suddenly low. Diane didn't smile. She didn't blink. "I was working at Mercy Hill Hospital in '98 when the county audit went missing. I remember exactly who was on that list. And who walked away clean." A beat passed, then 2.01 spoke. The judge leaned forward. "Approach the bench." And just like that, the entire courtroom shifted. Not in noise, but in atmosphere, thick now with old secrets and sudden fear. Diane picked up her folder. Her heart thudded, but her hands were steady. She hadn't come looking for a fight, but if they wanted one, she had 23 years of truth ready to burn. The courtroom was still holding its breath. Diane stood at the bench, close enough now to see the faint smudge on the judge's glasses and the tight set of his mouth. Judge Whitman's voice had dropped an octave, quieter, yes, but denser. Somehow, as if each word now carried legal weight or personal fear. Ms. Walker, he said slowly, you're aware that slandering a private citizen, especially one not party to this case, is grounds for contempt? I didn't slander anyone, Diane replied, her eyes unwavering. I said a name. A name tied to a scandal that disappeared. Before it ever got investigated. You asked for something material. That's as material as it gets. Whitman glanced toward the court reporter. Strike the last comment from the record. No, Diane said. Leave it. I want it on the record. A heavy silence pressed in. He leaned back, folding his hands. The court will take a brief recess. The gavel cracked once. Diane barely flinched. The bailiff called it out, and people began shifting in their seats. Lawyers whispered. Alexandra Tyne rose quickly, her laptop half closed, her lips pursed into a thin, unreadable line, but Diane didn't move. She stood by the defense table, watching Whitman disappear into chambers, and she knew, she'd hit a nerve. In the hallway, Diane paced in slow, deliberate steps. Her heels clicked against the tile floor. Her palms felt damp. She paused near the vending machines, aware of the hallway mirror just behind them. Her reflection looked nothing like the woman who ran hospital departments and sat on hiring committees. That woman wore lanyards, not court summons. That woman believed in systems. A voice cut through the air beside her, Ms. Walker. She turned to find Alexandra Tyne. Her coat was draped over one arm, phone in the other, her expression restrained. I'm going to suggest, Alexandra said calmly, that you withdraw your statement before the hearing resumes. Off the record. Why? Diane asked. Did I touch a sore spot? Alexandra gave a tight smile. Because throwing around conspiracy theories in a housing dispute won't end well for you. Especially not in this courthouse. You think this is just about housing? Diane stepped forward, lowering her voice. I knew Richard Loden. I know what he did. And I know who helped him disappear. Something flickered across Alexandra's face, not fear exactly, but a recognition. A calculus behind the eyes. She checked her phone. Careful, Ms. Walker. You're not the only one who knows things. Then she walked away. 15 minutes later, the court reconvened. Judge Whitman's tone was clipped but neutral. The court has reviewed the initial documents submitted by both parties. Ms. Walker, if you have relevant evidence regarding the validity of the eviction, you will submit it through appropriate channels. If you continue making unsubstantiated claims unrelated to the current action, I will end this hearing and rule in favor of the plaintiff. Diane nodded. Understood. But her mind was already elsewhere, rewinding to a foggy afternoon in 1998, when she sat in the administrator's office at Mercy Hill, flipping through a stack of invoices that didn't make sense. They were for medical supplies the hospital never ordered, at least not through official vendors. But the payments were signed off. She'd asked questions, and then, suddenly, she was moved to a different department. The man who approved those invoices? Richard Loden. Senior Procurement Officer. He vanished 3 weeks later, just before a county inquiry began. The audit that followed was closed quietly. Insufficient findings, they called it. Diane never forgot, now that same name was embedded in the ownership paperwork for Helix Property Holdings, though not directly. It was in the notary stamp. RL Notary and Financial Trust. Buried deep in the signature logs of property transfers. Coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel like one. After the hearing, Judge Whitman ordered a continuance, citing new claims that require verification. The next court date was set for 3 weeks later. Diane exited the courthouse into a crisp afternoon wind. The sun had dropped lower, casting long shadows over the steps. As she reached the bottom stair, a black sedan pulled to the curb. The window rolled down halfway. A man in sunglasses looked at her. Ms. Walker? She stopped walking. I suggest you let this go, he said, voice calm. You got a delay. Take the win. Who sent you? She asked. The man didn't answer. The window rolled up. The car disappeared into traffic. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table again, lights dimmed, papers spread across the surface. She reached into an old filing box and pulled out a thick folder labeled Mercy Hill, 1998. She had never thrown it away. Inside, photocopies of invoices, 2 internal memos, 1 faded employee ID badge. Diane flipped to a note she had scribbled. In the corner of a report more than 25 years ago, Loden is not working alone. Follow the payments. She stared at the sentence for a long time, then picked up her phone. She called her oldest daughter, Marie. Hey, Mom, Marie said, half distracted. How did court go? Diane paused. I need a favor, she said. Do you still have access to county records through your firm? Marie hesitated. Probably. Why? I need to find out who's really behind Helix Holdings. Marie's voice lowered. Mom, are you okay? Is this about, it's bigger than the eviction, Diane said. It's about what they buried. And I think I just started digging. Marie Walker sat hunched over her laptop, biting at the inside of her cheek, a habit she'd had since law school. The office was quiet now, the evening crew gone, the hallway lights dimmed. Only the hum of the coffee machine and the occasional ping from Slack reminded her she hadn't stepped into some sort of time bubble. On her screen, county land transfer records, holding company structures, shell corporations. She wasn't digging through anything illegal, yet. Everything she was accessing was technically public, if you knew how to look. Helix Property Holdings, she muttered, typing it again, and there it was. Registered in Delaware, of course. No surprise. Anonymous board, generic legal rep, no listed phone number. But after 3 cross-referenced property records and 2 corporate subsidiaries, she found something she hadn't expected, a parent company named Midline Group Incorporated. Headquartered not in Delaware, but in Larkfield, Missouri, and right below that, in a footer barely legible, the registered agent, R.L. Notary and Financial Trust, Marie blinked. It was the name her mother had mentioned. A name she'd never heard until yesterday, and yet here it was, trailing the edges of an otherwise spotless legal framework. She sat back in her chair and exhaled. Jesus, Mom. Then she reached for her phone. Diane answered on the second ring. It's real, Marie said before she could say hello. The name you gave me, Loden, he's not on any official documents, but he's baked into the structure. Quietly. Like insulation. Diane closed her eyes. I also found a real estate investment trust tied to Midline. They've bought up 8 properties in your neighborhood in the last 2 years. So it's a land grab, Diane murmured. All on paper. All sanitized. Marie hesitated. Mom, are you sure you want to push this further? There it was. The edge in her daughter's voice. Worry dressed as practicality. I didn't start this, Diane said softly. But I'm not backing down now. Marie sighed. I'll keep digging. But please, be careful. Later that night, Diane sat in the living room with an old manila folder spread across her lap. The house was quiet except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Outside, the streetlight buzzed over her frost-slick driveway. She flipped to a memo from 1998, printed on Mercy Hill Hospital letterhead, regarding a supply chain audit discrepancy. There were initials at the bottom. RL and someone else, JC. She hadn't noticed that second signature back then. Now it felt like a thread. She scribbled it on a sticky note. JC, who? A knock at the door startled her. It was nearly midnight. She stood slowly, heart thumping. Another knock, harder this time. Diane walked to the door, her hand instinctively grazing the deadbolt. Who is it? She called out. Silence. She looked through the peephole. Nobody. The next morning, Diane went to the local records office. It was a small, beige building tucked behind City Hall, usually half empty. She walked in with a folder, a fake smile, and the practiced charm of someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating hospital bureaucracy. I'm looking for development permits for the Juniper Street corridor, she said, leaning over the counter. The clerk, a young man in glasses, blinked, mildly confused. You're a resident? Researching for the neighborhood watch. Zoning concerns. He shrugged. You want city filings or state level? City's a good start. He led her to a desk and logged into the archive terminal. 30 minutes. Later, Diane had what she needed, a scanned application for a zoning variance filed under Midline Group. It had been expedited, pushed through in 6 days. Unusual. The signature on the application? Jeffrey Connors. JC. She nearly dropped her pen. Connors was the former assistant county commissioner. She remembered his name from the newspaper articles. He'd worked closely with Loden during the Mercy Hill procurement contract years. Diane hadn't connected the two then. But now? She had her second thread. That evening, Marie showed up at her mother's doorstep holding a plastic grocery bag and a tired look. I brought food, she said, by way of hello. And I don't trust you to eat when you get obsessed. Diane smiled faintly. Come in. I've got something. They sat at the dining table, noodles steaming between them, files and old notepads scattered like a detective's dream. Diane handed Marie the zoning printout. Marie read it, lips pressed. Jeffrey Connors, she said. God, I know that name. He ran some real estate consultancy after the county stuff. Didn't he disappear from public life? Diane nodded. He took a payout to step away from office. Then went silent. Now he's helping push land acquisitions for Helix. Marie frowned. This is bigger than an eviction. It always was, Diane said. I think I was supposed to be collateral. A loose end from a chapter they thought was closed. Marie looked at her mother for a long time. You're not going to let this go? No, Diane said. Because? They count on silence. And if I don't speak, nobody else will. That night, Diane received a text from an unknown number: "Stop digging. This is your only warning." She stared at it for a moment, then turned the phone off and set it face down. On the table, she didn't scare easily. Not anymore, not when the walls were finally starting to crack. The warning text didn't keep Diane up that night, the memories did. They came in strange pieces, not quite dreams, but not fully remembered either. Faces from 25 years ago. A missing shipment. A nurse crying in the stairwell after. A department budget was gutted. Conversations in the break room that trailed off when she entered. And Loden's voice, casual and cold, echoing through the wall of her old office: "You don't need to understand. You just need to sign." When Diane woke at 4:12 a.m., she made coffee, tied her hair back, and began reading through a pile of old newspaper clippings she'd pulled from the library archives. In the yellowed pages of the Larkfield Chronicle, she found a story dated March 17, 1999, County ends hospital contract probe due to insufficient evidence. Below the headline, one name jumped out at her: Earl Betts, a junior reporter. At the time, byline buried on page 3. Now, he was a ghost. It took Marie 2 days to track him down. He wasn't on social media, had no LinkedIn, and hadn't written a published article in over 15 years. But she found an old faculty roster from a journalism workshop hosted in Oregon, and there he was: Earl Betts, guest speaker, 2012. From there, a property record linked him to a small house in rural Tennessee. Retired, divorced, off the grid. When Diane called the number Marie found, no one answered. She tried again the next day. Then again. On the fourth call, someone picked up. "Hello?" A man's voice. Gruff. Suspicious. "Mr. Betts? Who's asking?" "My name is Diane Walker. I used to work at Mercy Hill Hospital." Silence. "I think you wrote something in 1999 about the procurement fraud. I'd like to talk." More silence. Then, "I don't do that anymore." "I'm not asking for a headline," Diane said. "I'm asking for help. They're coming after people again." Click. The line went dead. Diane sat back, frustrated but unsurprised. Marie was pacing the room behind her. "This is a terrible idea, Mom. You want to drive to Tennessee?" "What, just knock on his door?" "Sometimes people need to see your face," Diane said. "To believe you're serious. You realize if he tells you nothing, or worse, calls someone, I'm not asking you to come." Marie didn't respond. She just stared at the folder in her mother's hand, the one marked Betts, Earl, 1999. 3 days later, Diane arrived in Birch Hollow, Tennessee, population under 1,000. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine. The town had one diner, one gas station, and no stoplights. Betts lived in a cabin on the outskirts, halfway up a gravel road that twisted through bare-limbed trees. It was quiet, too quiet. As Diane stepped out of her rental car, the crunch of her boots on gravel felt indecently loud. She knocked once. No answer. Then the door creaked open, and there he was, older now, white beard, heavy-set, leaning on a cane. His eyes were clear though, and sharper than she expected. "I told you." "No," he said. "I know," Diane replied. "But you wrote about things no one else would touch. And now they're back. I just want to talk." He exhaled hard through his nose. 10 minutes. They sat at a kitchen table that smelled faintly of old wood and pipe smoke. On the wall hung a photo of Betts with a woman who looked kind and tired. "She passed in '09, he said, noticing Diane's glance. "Cancer." "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So, Loden. That's what this is about?" "He's back. Through front companies. Property takeovers. My house is one of them." Betts rubbed his face. "That bastard. I chased that trail until it disappeared. Half the files vanished from public record. The county paper shut down the story. Said it wasn't worth the legal exposure." "Did you ever find out who was behind him?" "I had a list," Betts said. "Connors was on it. So was a developer named Harlow Reed. But the money trail ended in legal trusts and numbered accounts. It was like punching water." "Did you ever go to the FBI?" Betts gave her a look. "You think I didn't try? They passed me off to a field agent who never called back. Then my editor told me to stop digging. Said the insurance premiums were about to triple." He reached for a dusty box from the nearby shelf, pulled out a faded folder, and slid it across the table. "I kept what I could." Diane opened it carefully. Inside, memos, receipts, one grainy photo of a meeting, Loden, Connors, and a man Diane didn't recognize. She turned it toward Betts. "Who's that?" Betts squinted. "That's Harlow Reed. The money man. Is he still around?" Betts chuckled bitterly. "He's not just around. He owns half of Newberry County now. His name's on the new development. Contracts, the courthouse renovation, hell, even the police charity gala. Untouchable." Diane stared at the photo. She didn't believe in untouchable. Back in the motel that night, Diane scanned the photo and sent it to Marie. Marie replied. 2 minutes later. That man has donated over $500,000 to local officials since 2016. You sure this is where you want to go? Diane's answer was simple, yes. We follow the money. Diane stood in her driveway, keys in hand, staring at the crumpled eviction notice someone had shoved through her mail slot again, this time without an envelope. No tape. No courtesy, just a folded piece of paper with the same black lettering. Now dirt-streaked from where it had skidded across the hardwood floor, she sighed and stepped over it. Inside, the house felt smaller. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the knowledge that someone, or something, had been inside. She double-checked the locks. Nothing broken. Nothing stolen. But the couch cushion had been moved. The kitchen drawer with her tools was slightly ajar. They'd been inside. They wanted her to know it. Later that day, Diane visited Alan Mayfield, her former neighbor and longtime friend. He'd once served as deputy director of the county health board, a steady, affable man with a mild temper and an encyclopedic memory of local politics. They hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Not since his sudden retirement and her quiet withdrawal after her husband's death, but Alan had once known the procurement process at Mercy Hill better than anyone. She knocked on his door, and when it opened, there he was, a little thinner. His gray hair combed carefully, glasses perched on his nose like always. Diane, he said, surprised. It's been a while. I need to talk to you, she said. It's important. He glanced behind her, then stepped aside. Come in. The kitchen still smelled of coffee and cherry pipe tobacco, familiar comforts. I'm sorry for the intrusion, Diane said, sitting carefully. But I'm trying to piece together what happened back in '98. With Loudon. With Connors. And now there's a name, Harlow Reed, showing up in development contracts all over town. Alan stiffened. That was a long time ago, Dee. I know. But it's not over. They're pushing people out. Forging records. I've got proof. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked at her with an expression somewhere between guilt and warning. You want to know the truth? I do. He leaned back. Here's the truth. People wanted that scandal to die. It wasn't just about the money. It was what that money protected: re-election campaigns, development deals, county board appointments. I told the internal auditor what I knew, and the next week, the report vanished. Then came the layoffs. I kept my mouth shut because I had 2 kids in college. Diane's jaw clenched. And you're still keeping it shut? I'm telling you this, he said, gesturing between them. But don't expect me to go on record. These people? They don't fight clean. You poke them, they don't just come for you, they come for your family, your pension, your name. I already got poked, she said. They broke into my house. They're watching me. Alan didn't look surprised. I'm trying to bring them into the light, she said. He reached for his coffee. Sometimes people don't want light. They want silence. Especially if their hands are dirty too. Diane stood, the air suddenly heavy. I thought you were different, Alan. I was, he said softly. Then I got old. And tired. And scared. She nodded, throat tight. Thanks for the coffee. Outside, the wind cut through her coat. The sky had turned that strange winter gray, not quite overcast, not quite clear. Just blank. Ominous. She sat in her car for a moment, staring at her rearview mirror, the sedan. Behind her was the same one that had followed her from the courthouse last week. Parked a little too long. Same dent in the bumper. Same tinted windows. They weren't even pretending anymore. She started the engine and pulled away. That night, Marie called her from work. Mom, she said, without greeting. You're not going to believe what I found. Tell me. Reed owns stock in a company called Raxon Security. They're subcontracted by Helix 4 Property Protection Services. Want to guess what that includes? Intimidation? Marie's silence was answer enough. There's more, she said. Raxon was involved in 2 wrongful eviction lawsuits in Florida last year. Quiet settlements. No press. Diane sat down at her kitchen table. The silence of the house felt alive. Did you find anything on Reed personally? She asked. Marie hesitated. He made a donation in 1999 to a nonprofit called Future Care, a campaign front for Richard Loudon's run at city council. The check cleared 2 days after the hospital procurement report was buried. 25 years, Diane whispered. And they're still protecting each other. Marie's voice was quieter now. I looked into the judge too. Diane's heart skipped. Whitman? He ruled in favor of Helix in 4 separate cases last year. Each time, the defendant lacked legal representation. Each time, he denied continuance. It's a pattern. Then I'm not imagining it. No, Marie said. You're not. That night, Diane pulled out the photograph Betts had given her, the one of Loudon, Connors, and Reed at that long-forgotten fundraiser. She placed it beside the zoning documents, the forged lease termination, the security firm contracts, the blank-faced judge, and something clicked. They'd built a system. One that lasted decades. One that didn't rely on brute force, but on silence, access, and money flowing just under the surface. She was the fracture line now, the one fault they hadn't predicted. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Lorna," she said, when the voice answered. "Oh my God, Diane? Are you? I need to meet," she said. "Tomorrow. It's about Mercy Hill. It's about all of it." She hung up before Lorna could answer. Some names came with doors, others came with keys. Lorna kept the same house on Willow Street, a modest, peach brick bungalow with sun-faded shutters and wind chimes that clinked like silverware in the breeze. Diane hadn't been there in almost 12 years, not since the baby shower for Lorna's first grandchild. She stood at the front gate for a moment, unsure what to expect, then the door creaked open. Lorna stood in the doorway, a cardigan over her dress, hair thinner now, face softer, wearier. "Diane," she said. "You look exactly the same." "That's a lie," Diane smiled. "But thank you." Inside, the house smelled like lemon oil and tea. The walls were still decorated with watercolor paintings, local artists, mostly, and pictures of grandchildren lined the mantel. They sat across from each other on a floral couch. "You said it was about Mercy Hill," Lorna said. "After all this time?" "It's about what we didn't say," Diane replied. Lorna didn't move for a long time. Then she slowly set her tea down. "I always thought it would come back," she said. "Like rot under a floorboard. You cover it up. But you know it's there. I need your help. I'm not sure how much I can give. You were in materials and records back then. You saw the vendors. The contracts. The orders that never came." Lorna looked away. "Do you remember the Form 9C? Diane asked. "The internal ledger we used before the billing platform upgrade?" Lorna nodded slowly. "That form was never digital. That's why I'm asking. Because I think someone's trying to erase every trace." Lorna stood up and walked to a low cabinet near the bookshelf. She opened a drawer, pulled out a slim folder, and brought it back. "I kept one," she said. "I don't know why. Maybe guilt. Maybe just because." Diane opened it carefully. There it was, Form 9C, Mercy Hill Procurement Registry, April 1998. In black ink, line 17, a handwritten entry. Vendor, RL Notary and Financial Trust Purchase, 12 cardiac defibrillators. Amount, $184,000. Authorized by J. Connor/R. Loden. But beside the entry, in Lorna's own handwriting, was a note. "No devices received. Payment marked complete." Diane stared at it, her chest tight. "This is it," she whispered. Lorna sat back down. "It was my note. I remember asking Richard about it. He told me it was a delay, blamed the vendor. But then the shipment never arrived, and suddenly the entry was gone from the next ledger. No explanation. Why didn't you say something?" Lorna looked at her, pain dark in her eyes. "Because my husband had just lost his job. Because we had bills. Because I was afraid, Diane." "So was I," Diane said. "But fear doesn't protect you. It just delays the damage." Lorna touched her hand gently. "You're braver than I was." "I'm just older now," Diane said. "And tired of watching men like them rewrite our history." That night, Diane returned home and scanned the Form 9C. She sent a copy to Marie, along with a message. "We now have a verifiable transaction linked directly to Loden and Connors. Fraud. Misappropriation of public funds. Original signature. Not digital." Marie responded almost instantly. "That's enough to bring this to a journalist. I know someone at the Herald, not local. National. Trustworthy." Diane hesitated. Going public meant no going back. No quiet settlement. No forgotten delay in the court calendar. It meant lawyers, reporters, and lawsuits, possibly threats worse than a car parked across the street. "Still," she replied, "set up the meeting." The next day, Diane went to retrieve her mail. Among the usual flyers and bills was a small envelope with no return address. The paper was thick. Expensive. Inside was a single Polaroid, her house. Taken at night. From the street. In the photo, her bedroom window glowed faintly. A message was scrawled on the back in red ink. "You're not the only one with a daughter." She stood still, the wind biting at her wrists where her sleeves didn't reach. Then she went inside, locked every bolt, and called Marie. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. "Stay alert," she told her daughter. "Don't be alone. In parking garages. Don't ignore strange cars." "Mom, I'm fine," Diane said. "But we've rattled the nest. And I need you to understand something now." "What?" "I'm not backing down. Not even if they come for me." There was a pause on the line. A long one. Then Marie said, quietly, "Then neither am I." That night, Diane opened a fresh notebook. She titled the first page, "Names, Dates, Documents, Threats." And then she began to write, line by line, memory by memory, everything they once buried, because this time, she would not forget, and she would not be alone. The journalist arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. Diane was already there, seated at a small corner table with a ceramic mug between her hands and a folder in her lap. She wore her old wool coat, the one she hadn't worn in years. Because it made her feel unshakable. Caitlin Archer, 35, quiet, precise, and dressed in a charcoal gray blazer over dark jeans. She didn't introduce herself right away. She sat down, opened a leather-bound notebook, and nodded once. "I've read the documents Marie sent," Caitlin said. "I'm not going to ask if they're authentic. I already verified 3 of the signatures. One from a bank closure, one from a zoning committee hearing, and one from a tax document buried so deep I had to pull it through the Wayback Machine." Diane took a breath. "Then you know this isn't just a bad eviction." Caitlin's eyes sharpened. "It's a story about money, institutional rot, and coordinated silence. It's also a story about a woman standing in the middle of it all and refusing to sit down." Diane nodded. "But before I write anything," Caitlin continued, "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead. Do you understand the risk of going public? This won't just be about courtrooms. You'll be smeared. They'll go after your reputation. Your family. You may lose your home anyway." Diane didn't blink. "If I walk away, I lose more than a house. I lose who I am." Caitlin closed her notebook. "Then let's get to work." For the next 2 hours, they sat in the back booth while Diane laid out everything: the Mercy Hill procurement fraud, the hidden financial trail through Helix and Midline Group, the photo from 1998, the Form 9C Lorna saved, and the quiet threats that had escalated to surveillance. She showed Caitlin the Polaroid. The red scrawl on the back. Caitlin didn't flinch. "I've seen worse," she said. "Which is why we move quickly." She paused. "I want to run this as a feature investigation, but we'll also submit the records to an independent forensic accountant for review. If the public sees clean, objective numbers, we gain credibility." "And the names?" Diane asked. "We name them all." 3 days later, the article went live. It was published under the title, "The House They Tried to Steal: One Woman's Fight to Expose a 20-Year Political Cover-Up." By noon, it had over 40,000 shares. By sunset, local news outlets picked it up. The headline on Channel 7 read, "Former hospital administrator accuses prominent developer of long-buried corruption." Marie's phone buzzed nonstop at work. "Clients are asking if you're related to that Diane Walker," she said over the phone that evening. "And what did you say?" Diane asked. "I said yes," Marie said. "And that I'm proud of you." But exposure wasn't a shield. It was a flare. That night, Diane's car alarm went off at 2:17 a.m. When she looked out the window, she saw the back windshield smashed. A brick lay inside, surrounded by glittering glass. Taped to it was another message: "Stop or we move to fire." She called the police. They took a report. Shrugged. Promised to increase patrols. She knew better than to count on it. So she did what she always had. She documented everything: photos, timestamps, names, and then she called Caitlin. "I want you to print the threats too," she said. "All of them." The next day, Caitlin ran a follow-up piece. Intimidation tactics escalate against whistleblower in Larkfield corruption probe. This time, it included a scanned image of the brick and note. A timeline of the break-ins. A pattern of similar complaints from other tenants in Helix-owned properties, most of whom had been too afraid to speak. Not anymore. By nightfall, Caitlin's inbox was flooded with anonymous tips. One from a man who had worked at Midline's accounting firm in 2011. Another from a nurse who remembered the missing equipment year at Mercy Hill. A third, unsigned, from someone who claimed to know where Loden had resurfaced last year. And one message Diane didn't expect. It came from Earl Betts. "They called me this morning. Wanted to know if I'd clarified anything. I didn't. I won't. I'm with you now. Say the word, I'll speak on record." She stared at the screen, stunned. Then she typed back, "Say it." The next week was a blur. An ethics committee announced it would re-examine former county contracts. The mayor released a limp statement promising transparency. But the public wasn't satisfied. Lorna called her crying. "I saw you on the news," she said. "You looked like yourself. Again." Marie came by with groceries and extra deadbolt locks, but something darker was also brewing. One of Caitlin's sources went silent, and a man in a baseball cap was caught trying to access Diane's backyard gate on Tuesday at dawn. The police still shrugged, but Diane didn't. She stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at her battered car, and said aloud, "This doesn't end in fear. It ends in court." She opened a new folder on her laptop, Walker vs. Helix et al., civil filing materials, because now it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about holding them accountable. The first hearing wasn't dramatic. No cameras, no gasps, just the clatter of heels on courthouse floors and the sterile murmur of case numbers being called. but it was real. Walker v. Helix Property Holdings ETAL.IT was on the docket. Diane sat in courtroom 2B beside her newly appointed attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Clara Singh from the Legal Accountability Foundation, who had taken Diane's case pro bono after reading Caitlin's article. Across the aisle sat a man she'd never seen before, flanked by a team of Helix lawyers. They didn't look nervous. They looked bored, but she saw it in the man's eyes. When Clara slid a copy of the Form 9C across the desk and said clearly, "We are not just claiming wrongful eviction. We are alleging conspiracy to defraud the county of over $180,000 in public funds, rooted in historic procurement corruption, with direct ties to this plaintiff's current displacement." That got their attention. The judge, a new one, after Whitman had quietly recused himself, ordered discovery proceedings to begin within 30 days. Helix's motion to dismiss was denied. It was the smallest legal win Diane had ever seen, and it changed everything. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. It hadn't stopped buzzing since the court filing hit the news. Local talk radio was chewing on it. The Herald posted a second update. An editor from the Times requested an interview, but it was the voicemail that made her pause. "Hey, Dee. It's Alan." She hadn't spoken to Alan Mayfield since their uncomfortable visit weeks ago. I read the filing. I saw what you're doing. I want to help now. I should have helped earlier. Maybe I can still do some good. Call me back?" Diane stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't know if she believed him, but she knew one thing: they were moving. The tide had shifted. 3 days later, she received a letter from the county comptroller's office. It confirmed a pending audit of all procurement records related to Mercy Hill Hospital between 1997 and 2000. Lorna called her, breathless. "It's real now," she said. "It's all happening." And it was, until it wasn't. The call came at 1:42 a.m. "Marie, Mom," she said, panicked. "Someone broke into my building." Diane sat up. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay. I wasn't home. But they trashed the office. Not just mine, the whole legal floor." "Was anything taken?" "Just files. Mostly old ones. But they were specific. They knew what to look for." Marie paused. "I think they were looking for your case." Diane felt a chill grip her spine. "Did you tell the police?" "They're filing it as vandalism. Nothing more." Of course, the next day, Diane drove to Marie's building. The lobby reeked of dust and panic. Desks overturned. Ceiling. Tiles dangling like pulled teeth. Some filing cabinets had been pried open, others smashed. Marie stood beside her office door, arms crossed. They weren't subtle. Diane scanned the mess, then she saw it, a single sheet of paper pinned to the wall with a utility knife, her name typed. No message. Just her name. "You have to stay with me," Diane said. Marie shook her head. "I'm not running." Diane stepped closer. "This isn't about pride. This is strategy. They're going after what I love." Marie's face softened. "Then, let's make sure what you love wins." But the hardest blow came 2 days later, and not from strangers. It came from Alan, the man who had promised to help, the man who called to apologize. She was at the cafe when her phone lit up with Caitlin's text, "You need to see this, now." Attached was a press release. Alan Mayfield, former Deputy Health Board Director, issues formal statement denying any knowledge of Mercy Hill procurement fraud. Disputes claims made by a former colleague now pursuing attention. Calls case. A distortion of truth for personal gain. The air drained from Diane's lungs. He'd flipped. To protect himself? To protect someone else, she didn't know. But it stung worse than any brick, any letter, any photo. She called him once. No answer, twice voicemail. She didn't call again. Instead, she stood in the middle of her living room, staring at the headline. And made a choice. She would not mourn another betrayal. She would use it. In her next interview with Caitlin, Diane went on the record again. This time, she said what she hadn't before. Alan Mayfield knew. "I told him in 1998 that something was wrong with the invoices. He told me not to get involved. He called it standard administrative oversight. That's on the record now." Caitlin's voice was firm. "That's a dangerous claim." Then printed in bold. By week's end, the pressure had reached City Hall. A council member called for a temporary halt on all new development permits issued to Helix and Midline-affiliated firms. Harlow Reed made his first public statement. It was vague. Legal. Measured. He looked tired. That was new, but Diane knew better than to feel triumphant. This wasn't the final fight, this was the middle, the part where people started to fall away. Where support got quiet. Where headlines turned skeptical. Where prosecutors ducked calls. The system didn't break because of truth. It broke because of persistence, and she was still here, still fighting, still writing. It was Marie who found the name, buried in a footnote from an old county audit. She had been up all night reviewing a folder of personnel files scanned from Mercy Hill's archives. documents only recently released under a public information request Diane filed 2 months earlier. Mom, she said on the phone, her voice hollow, there was someone before you. Someone who tried to report it. Diane sat up straighter in bed. Who? Her name was Carla Benton. Compliance coordinator. She submitted an internal complaint in late '98, said the procurement files were being altered before submission. The memo was marked received, and then there's nothing else. No follow-up. No response. She worked in the same department I did, Diane said quietly. Why didn't I know her? Because 6 weeks after filing the complaint, she resigned. No forwarding address. No severance package. Her departure form was unsigned. Diane's breath slowed. Can you find her? She asked. I'm trying. By the end of the week, Marie tracked down a mortgage listing from 2004 in Ohio, a quiet town outside Toledo. Carla E. Benton. Age, 62. The number was disconnected. The address was still valid. Diane didn't hesitate. She drove 6 hours through rain and mist, the wipers a steady drumbeat of nerves against glass. The trees grew thinner as she left the city behind. Towns blurred into gas stations and flashing school zones. By late afternoon, she was standing on the porch of a narrow gray house with cracked shutters and a porch swing that hadn't moved. In years, she knocked once. A woman opened the door halfway, her face older than Diane remembered, though she had only seen it now in a faded ID photo. Yes. Carla? Diane asked. The woman's eyes widened, not in recognition, but in practiced wariness. I worked at Mercy Hill, Diane continued. In the late '90s. I found your complaint. Carla's grip on the door tightened. I don't want to talk about that. I think you should, Diane said softly. Because they're still doing it. They're still hurting people. Carla looked past her, scanning the empty road. Then, after a long pause, she opened the door. They sat in silence for several minutes. I've waited 26 years for someone to ask me about it, Carla said. Her voice was even, but her hands trembled slightly. You're the first. Diane listened as Carla recounted what she remembered, the invoices that didn't match orders. The dates that kept shifting. The moment she confronted her supervisor, a man who told her it was above her pay grade. The letter she wrote, slipped into inter-office mail, and then the silence, no investigation. No HR meeting. I was reassigned to night shift. Then, the harassment started. Late night calls. Someone slashed my tires in the hospital lot. I found a dead rat in my locker. Diane flinched. I had no proof. No support. I left, Carla said. I walked away before they could bury me further. They erased you, Diane whispered. They erased all of us. The ones who saw too much. The ones who asked questions. Carla reached into an old drawer and pulled out a battered envelope. I kept one thing, she said. A copy of my complaint. I wrote it by hand before I typed it. She handed the yellowing page to Diane, and there it was, the original whistleblower memo, signed Carla E. Benton, dated October 14, 1998. Diane read it twice, then something caught her eye at the bottom of the page, a name she hadn't expected. CC. J. Connors, Assistant County Commissioner. He was copied? Diane asked. Carla nodded. I didn't know then what it meant. I just followed the reporting chain. But it means he knew. He knew before the audit, before the cover-up. He was looped in the whole time. Which makes it criminal conspiracy. Diane said. Do you really think they'll let you prove it? Carla asked. These men aren't just corrupt, they're connected. I know, Diane said. But they made one mistake. What's that? They didn't finish erasing you. Back home, Diane scanned Carla's handwritten complaint and sent it to Caitlin, attaching a message. We have our first whistleblower. Original signature. Dated. Direct line to Connors. Caitlin replied 5 minutes later. This changes everything. That week, Caitlin's new article ran front page. Lost voice, found, 1998 Mercy Hill whistleblower surfaces after 26 years. Of silence. It included Carla's complaint, redacted only for personal information. It included Diane's confirmation of her authenticity. It included the detail that Connors had been directly copied. The article went viral. 2 Former Mercy Hill employees reached out to confirm harassment stories. An anonymous source at City Hall leaked internal memos from 1999 referencing a containment plan related to county procurement exposure, and on Friday, the state attorney general's office released a statement. We are reviewing newly presented evidence regarding past misconduct and its implications in ongoing civil litigation. No further comment at this time. That night, Diane sat with Marie on the back steps of her house, the scent of rain thick in the air. Do you think they'll charge him? Marie asked. I don't know, Diane said. But now they can't say they didn't know. She looked out across the dark street. They can't pretend she never existed anymore. Marie was quiet for a moment. You know what scares me? She said. What? You're winning. And that makes you more dangerous to them than ever. Diane exhaled slowly. Then let them come. But deep inside, Diane knew Marie was right. The closer she got to the truth, the more someone, somewhere, would decide enough was enough, and next time, they wouldn't leave a Polaroid, that they'd leave silence, unless Diane kept speaking. The email arrived just after 2:00 a.m. Diane found it the next morning, sandwiched between news alerts and reminders about her court prep. The sender's address was scrambled, a Proton Mail alias. The subject line was blank. But the body contained 6 words: "You're looking in the right places. Meet me. Today. 6 p.m. Old Larkfield Library, basement entrance. No name. No contact." Just a time and place. She stared at the screen, her heart drumming. She forwarded it to Caitlin and Marie, then called them both. Neither tried to talk her out of going, they just told her not to go alone. At 5:45 p.m., Diane pulled into the gravel lot behind the old public library. It had been shuttered for over a decade, its stone facade stained by rain and time. The front door was chained shut. But the basement entrance around the back, half hidden under a rusted metal staircase, was slightly ajar. Marie sat in the passenger seat, tense. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," Diane said. "But if there's someone inside trying to help, I have to know." Marie handed her a small digital recorder. "Take it. Record everything. Just in case." Diane nodded, then she stepped out into the fading light and walked toward the doors. Inside, the air smelled of mold and dust. Her footsteps echoed off concrete. Old shelving units leaned like tired soldiers against cracked walls. A single overhead bulb flickered dimly in the far corner. A man was already waiting. Mid-40s. Neat gray suit. No tie. Sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He didn't offer a name. "You came," he said. "You're the one who reached out," Diane replied, keeping her voice level. "Why?" "Because I've been watching this unfold," he said. "And it's about to escalate." He pulled a folder from his satchel and slid it across the table between them. "Those are internal memos from 1999. Connors knew the audit was about to go public. He met with Loden and Reed to coordinate a suppression plan. 3 signatures. Stamped. Archived. But hidden in a personnel folder under a false index. Diane opened the folder. The first memo was short, a logistics summary about narrative control in the wake of unverified procurement discrepancies. The language was sanitized, but the intent was clear. Then came the second, a memo marked confidential, interoffice communication only, dated November 2nd, 1999. J. Connors from H. Reed. Subject: public oversight exposure. RL will manage press narrative if whistleblower leaks again. Suggest immediate reassignment of non-compliant staff. I trust you'll handle it before it gets noisy. Diane's breath caught. "These are originals?" she asked. "Scans of originals," he replied. "I've seen the physical files myself." "Where?" "I work in the records compliance office," he said. "Technically under the county administrator's office. I'm supposed to destroy misfiled personnel content during system audits. But I didn't." "Why now?" she asked. "Why risk this?" He was quiet a moment. "Because your article brought back something I tried to forget. My sister worked at Mercy Hill. She was let go around the same time as Carla Benton. They told her it was budget cuts. But she always believed it was something else. She died 2 years ago. Cancer. But before she passed, she told me, they erased me like I was nothing." His voice tightened. "She died thinking the truth didn't matter. I don't want to die the same way." Diane swallowed. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "Today, I'm nobody. But you'll have more. Soon. I'm working on getting the sign-in logs from that meeting, the one where Loden, Reed, and Connors signed off the suppression." He stood, already slipping toward the door. "Be careful," he said. "They're watching the people who get too close. Why not go to the press yourself?" Diane called after him. He paused in the doorway. "Because they know my face. Yours scares them more." Then he was gone. Outside, Marie rushed to meet her. "Are you okay?" she asked. Diane nodded, gripping the folder tightly. "We have something. Memos. Confirmed signatures." They drove in silence for a few minutes, headlights cutting through fog. "Mom," Marie said finally, "I need to tell you something. And I need you not to panic." Diane looked over sharply. "They tried to reach me yesterday. Through a private investigator. Said I'd be smart to convince you to settle out of court. Quietly." Diane's jaw clenched. "What did you say?" "I said they clearly don't know you." By the next morning, Caitlin had reviewed the memos and verified the county seals. "This is more than evidence," she said on the phone. "It's pattern. Collusion. Conspiracy. This could trigger a criminal inquiry, if the right pressure is applied." But not everyone welcomed the new documents. Later that evening, Diane received another anonymous message, this one hand-delivered. no envelope, folded beneath her windshield wiper, last chance. Walk away before you can't. No name. No signature, but written in the same red ink as before. That night, Diane recorded a voice memo for Caitlin. In it, she detailed everything about the library meeting, the folder, the man's story, his sister. If anything happens to me, she said, this story doesn't end. It gets louder. She hit send, then she returned to her desk, pulled out her notebook, and wrote one line at the top of the next page: they are afraid of the story. Not of me. That's my advantage. The courthouse lobby was louder than usual. Photographers lined the sidewalk. A few reporters hovered near the security checkpoint. Most were here for the other high-profile case upstairs, but whispers of Walker versus Helix et al. Had started to spread. Especially after Caitlin's last article, which concluded with one stark sentence: if these allegations are proven true, this will be the most significant procurement fraud case in Larkfield's modern history. Diane entered through the rear side door, escorted by Clara Singh, her attorney. Marie trailed behind, keeping her mother's pace but watching every shadow. You're sure about testifying today? Clara asked, pausing near the elevator. I have to, Diane said. Before someone else disappears. Clara nodded, then lowered her voice. Betts hasn't checked in since yesterday. His phone's off. Didn't respond to my subpoena email. No show at his motel. Diane's stomach sank. You think he ran? I think he was made to, Clara said grimly. We don't have time to find out. They entered courtroom 4A. Modern, cold, and overlit. The judge, the Honorable Denise Holland, was sharp, composed, and infamously unsympathetic to spectacle. But she had allowed the full complaint to be heard: wrongful eviction tied to systemic fraud, with submitted evidence tracing decades-old corruption directly to Helix Holdings board. On the plaintiff's side sat a three-person legal team from Helix, stone-faced behind silver briefcases. Behind Diane, a handful of quiet supporters, 2 local reporters, and Caitlin, typing into a slim laptop from the second row. Clara rose. We call Diane Walker to the stand. Testifying was nothing like Diane imagined. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't cathartic. It was surgical, she answered clearly, factually. She walked the court through her tenancy, the forged lease termination, the ignored maintenance logs, the missing paperwork, the illegal lockout attempt. Then, Clara guided her gently toward the broader context: her history at Mercy Hill Hospital, the early signs of fraud, the intimidation, the evidence buried and then recovered decades later. Finally, the names. Loden, Connors, Reed. She laid them down like bricks. When Helix's lawyer cross-examined, he smirked. So your position, Ms. Walker, is that you've uncovered a 25-year criminal conspiracy? And that it conveniently centers on your personal eviction? Diane looked at him with a calmness that made even the court clerk glance up. No, she said. The conspiracy started 25 years ago. My eviction just gave me a reason to finish what someone else started. Clara's next witness was supposed to be Earl Betts, the journalist. The man who had kept silent too long and finally agreed to speak, but when the bailiff called his name into the hallway, no one came. Clara turned. Her expression strained. We will delay his testimony, she told the court. For now, we move forward. Diane sat in stunned silence, then the judge's voice rang out. Next witness? Clara hesitated for half a second, then made a decision. We call Carla Benton. A murmur rippled through the room. Carla entered. Slowly, her shoulders square but her face pale. She wore a simple gray dress and clutched a printed copy of her original 1998 complaint like a lifeline. On the stand, she trembled, but her voice didn't shake. She spoke of falsified orders, of being reassigned, of harassment, of silence, of exile. When Helix's lawyer tried to paint her as disgruntled, she reached into her purse and produced a dated notebook with employee names, delivery logs, and her original memo, all in her handwriting. I didn't keep these to destroy anyone, she said. I kept them because I couldn't forget. And now I won't let them forget, either. After court recessed, Diane stood in the hallway, staring at her phone. Still no word from Earl. Marie appeared beside her, whispering, Mom, you need to see this. She handed over her own phone. A photo, grainy, low light, but unmistakable. Earl Betts. At a bus terminal. Wearing a hoodie, looking over his shoulder. Time-stamped yesterday. He's running, Diane whispered. Or being pushed, Marie said. Either way, he's gone. Diane stared at the image for a long time, then she looked at the courtroom door, at the lawyers reassembling their briefcases, at the journalists hovering like vultures with notepads and caffeine breath. They want us to unravel, she said. To doubt the ground we're standing on. Then don't give them that, Marie replied. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table, staring at the folder from the man in the library, the one she still hadn't named to anyone, not even Clara. Inside, the memos, the meeting logs, the sign-in sheet she hadn't dared show yet. she knew she was holding the match, but lighting it could bring everything down, not just for Reed and Connors, but for people who helped her too, and yet. She remembered Carla's shaking voice, Lorna's guilt, Marie's courage, her own broken window, and the line that had guided her for months, truth is louder when it survives intimidation. She picked up the phone. Clara? It's Diane. I have something you need to see before closing arguments. The morning of closing arguments, the sky over Larkfield cracked open with cold rain. Diane arrived early, dressed in the same navy suit she wore the day of her first hearing. The one she had once described as tight. It didn't feel tight anymore. It felt earned. She entered courtroom 4A and took her place beside Clara. Clara turned to her, calm but alert. Ready? I brought the match, Diane said. Clara raised an eyebrow. Diane passed her the folder, the sealed sign-in sheet from 1999, the one with all three names, Connors, Loden, Reed. A forgotten entry from a county planning subcommittee meeting. Marked as internal strategy session, stamped confidential, and tucked away in a personnel archive. Clara skimmed it, her face shifting. Do we use this today? We have to, Diane said. Before someone else disappears. Clara opened her closing argument with quiet force. This case, at its surface, is about an unlawful eviction. But at its heart, it is about power, power that has gone unchecked. For decades. My client stood alone against a machine built to erase her. But she didn't just resist. She uncovered evidence of public fraud, internal collusion, and intimidation tactics used against multiple former employees, including a whistleblower who vanished into silence for 26 years. She lifted the folder. We submit into final evidence. The document Ms. Walker received from a county records official, a verified attendance sheet tying all three men to the 1999 meeting where suppression strategy was outlined. With this, we demonstrate that the same hands behind her eviction were the same hands manipulating county contracts long before she knew their names. There were no gasps, just a hush, a shift in atmosphere. As if the court itself had stopped. Pretending this was only about rent, the defense, as expected, objected to the late evidence. The judge allowed it. Their closing argument was clipped, technical. She has no direct link between the past and the current eviction. This is a tenant grievance inflated by media attention. These are coincidences, not conspiracies. But, even as the attorney spoke, Diane could see it in the jury's faces, weariness, curiosity, a quiet anger building behind their eyes. By the time the judge instructed deliberation, Diane already knew, the tide had turned. The jury took 7 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, his hands trembling slightly. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Diane Walker. We find the eviction was unlawful, retaliatory, and executed with willful disregard for legal process. We recommend referral of associated documents to the county district attorney for further review. Diane didn't cry, she just closed her eyes, and let the silence settle over her like rain finally stopping after a long, endless storm. The fallout came quickly. Within days, a special inquiry was announced into Helix Holdings and Midline Group. Harlow Reed released a public statement denying all wrongdoing. 2 county board members resigned. A new ethics committee was sworn in. Caitlin's final article hit national outlets under the headline, "She Wouldn't Be Quiet, the Woman Who Took on the System, and Made It Listen." Requests poured in, interviews, podcasts, speaking engagements. Diane declined almost all of them. She wasn't chasing attention, she was chasing air, breath, room to exhale. Marie moved in temporarily after the trial, helping sort through old files and finish the last of the court-ordered repairs to the house. They cooked together, sat in silence together, shared glances that needed no words. One night, Marie said, "You know you changed the story." Diane looked at her. "What story?" "The one everyone else wrote. About how this town forgets women like you. About how the machine always wins." Diane nodded. "I didn't stop the machine." "No," Marie said. "But you made it leak. And bleed. And now people see it." Weeks passed. Diane stood on her porch one morning, wrapped in a sweater, watching the sunlight filter through the juniper trees that had grown tall during her 23 years here. A new mailbox had been installed, the brick from her broken window was gone, but the past hadn't disappeared. It had simply been named. She stepped down to the sidewalk with a letter in her hand, not addressed to the court, not to a reporter. To Carla, inside, a thank you, a copy of the verdict, and a photo of Diane in front of the courthouse, hand resting on the steps below. She wrote, "You weren't erased. You were just waiting for someone to remember. Now the world will." She sealed the envelope and walked toward the mailbox, slowly, deliberately, as if each step stitched a final chapter closed.